The first thing you need to understand is that it was never just a car. To call it that is to call a masterpiece paint, or a cathedral stone. My 1968 Ford Mustang in a shade of Highland green so deep it looked black in the twilight was the culmination of 1,000 scraped-together paychecks, a decade of dreaming, and countless hours spent with grease-stained hands in my father's garage. It wasn't a vehicle. It was my V8-powered, chrome-trimmed, leather-scented vindication, a rolling testament to the fact that I, Maya, a girl who grew up on hand-me-down and instant noodles, could build something beautiful and call it my own. Every Saturday from the time I was 14, I'd worked at the local diner. Every tip, every dollar not spent on necessities, went into the Mustang Fund, a rusty coffee can I kept hidden in my closet. While my friends were buying concert tickets and trendy clothes, I was buying vintage hubcaps on eBay and subscribing to auto parts magazines. My father and I found her in a barn, a forgotten skeleton of steel and rust. We towed her home, and over the next 5 years, we brought her back to life. He taught me how to rebuild a carburetor, how to sand down a panel until it was smooth as glass, how to listen to the language of an engine. When she was finally finished just 2 months ago, she was more than perfect. She was a part of my soul, and my cousin Sasha knew it. She knew what every nut and bolt of that car meant to me. Sasha and I were born 6 months apart, and our family had always tried to frame us as twin stars, a matched set. It was a lie. We were a study in contrasts. I worked, Sasha charmed. I saved, Sasha spent. I built, Sasha broke. From the time we were children, she operated on a simple, destructive principle. If it was mine, it should be hers. Toys would vanish from my room and reappear in hers, broken. My favorite sweater was borrowed for a party and returned with a cigarette burn on the sleeve. Her mother, my Aunt Carol, was Sasha's chief enabler, her master of spin. "Oh, Maya, don't be so dramatic," Aunt Carol would say, her voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. "Sasha just loves your things. You should be flattered." Or, "She didn't mean to break it. You know how clumsy she is." The narrative was always the same. Sasha was the well-meaning, free-spirited victim of circumstance, and I was the materialistic, unforgiving shrew. The rest of the family, tired of the constant drama, usually just sighed and looked the other way. It was easier than fighting Aunt Carol. So when Sasha's 21st birthday began to loom on the horizon, a familiar sense of dread began to coil in my stomach. Her party was going to be an extravagant affair. A rented hall with a DJ and an open bar funded by her parents, of course, and Sasha naturally needed to make an entrance. She started her campaign subtly, with comments dropped at our weekly family dinners. "I just wish I had something iconic to drive up in," she'd sigh, looking at her perfectly manicured nails. "Something with classic lines, something that says, unforgettable." And then her eyes would slide to me, a predatory gleam softening into a sweet, cousinly smile. I knew exactly what was coming. My Mustang wasn't just a car to her. It was a prop, and she was determined to have it. The official request came, as I knew it would, a week before her party. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Sasha, which was rare. She usually communicated through demands texted to my aunt, which were then relayed to me. A direct call meant she was putting on the full-court press. "Maya, hi, sweetie," she chirped, her voice bubbly and fake. "So, I am in the middle of planning the final details for my party, and I have the most amazing idea." I braced myself. "Oh yeah?" I said, trying to sound non-committal. "Yes. So, you know how I rented that gorgeous dress? Well, I was thinking, what would be the most perfect accessory to go with it?" She paused for dramatic effect. "Your car?" "My car is not an accessory, Sasha," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Don't be so literal." She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that always grated on my nerves. "I just mean, can you imagine me pulling up to the venue in that gorgeous green machine? It would be legendary. My friends would die. I bet they would," I thought. "So, here's the plan. I'll need to pick it up on Thursday because a few of us are driving down to the coast for a pre-birthday spa day. We'll stay overnight, then drive back for the party on Saturday night. I'll have it back to you by Sunday. Promise." The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. Not just for the party. For an entire weekend. A road trip with her notoriously careless friends in my irreplaceable, hand-restored classic car. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration of ownership. "Sasha," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I'm flattered you love the car so much. I really am. But I'm going to have to say no." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and frigid. The bubbly warmth vanished. "What?" she said, her voice flat. "No," I repeated, feeling a surge of strength. "It's not just a car to me. It's icy, complicated. My insurance doesn't cover other drivers, and honestly, I'm the only person who's ever driven it. I'm not comfortable with anyone else taking it, especially on a long trip. You're not comfortable, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief and scorn. My 21st birthday, a once-in-a-lifetime event, and you're not comfortable. Do you hear how selfish you sound right now? It's not about being selfish, I argued, though I knew it was useless. It's my property. I worked for it. The answer is no. I can't believe this, she hissed. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to ruin my birthday because you can't stand to see me have a moment in the spotlight. The accusations were so wild, so far from the truth, that they were almost dizzying. This has nothing to do with jealousy, I said, my voice tired. This is about you respecting my property and my decision. The car is not available. End of story. There was a beat of seething silence, and then she spoke, her voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, Maya. You'll be sorry you did this to me. And then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I knew the fallout would be swift. Within 10 minutes, my phone rang again. It was Aunt Carol, and the storm began. I was selfish. I was cruel. I was putting a stupid car before family. I listened to her tirade, offered no arguments, and calmly repeated my decision. The line was drawn. For the first time in my life, I had told Sasha and her mother no, and I had made it stick. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. I had no idea how much it was about to cost me. The night after the phone call was quiet. Too quiet. I half expected Sasha to show up at my door, to escalate the argument in person, but there was nothing. Aunt Carol sent a barrage of guilt-laden texts, which I muted. I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself that they were just angry, that they would get over it. An adult tantrum that would eventually burn itself out. The next morning, I woke up early. It was a crisp, clear autumn day, the kind of day that was perfect for a drive. I made a cup of coffee, grabbed my keys, and headed out to the carport behind my apartment building, already imagining the rumble of the engine, the feeling of the open road, but the rumble never came. I stopped dead about 10 feet away from my parking space. The sun was glinting off the car in a strange way, catching on lines that shouldn't have been there. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered. On the pavement, the hot liquid splashing against my ankles, I didn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything except a rising, sickening wave of horror. Someone had keyed my car. No, keyed is too gentle a word. It implies a single spiteful scratch. This was a violation, an act of butchery. Deep, jagged gouges ran the length of the driver's side, from the front fender to the rear quarter panel. The metal was curled back in places, the pristine white primer glaring through the deep green paint like exposed bone. Another, deeper set of scratches zigzagged across the hood, a violent, angry scar. And then I saw the word, carved into the passenger side door, in big, crude, furious letters, SELFIS. I sank to my knees on the cold concrete. A sound escaped my throat, a ragged, wounded sob. This wasn't random vandalism. This wasn't a stranger. This was personal. This was rage. This was a message, sent with the tip of a key, signed with a word I had been called my entire life. This was Sasha. I don't know how long I knelt there, tracing the sharp edges of the letters with my eyes. Every scratch felt like it was on my own skin. All the work, all the love, all the years, vandalized in a single night of petty, childish fury. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight pressing down on me. But underneath the grief, something else was beginning to stir. It was a cold, hard knot of anger, colder and harder than anything I had ever felt before. The kind of anger that burns away tears and leaves behind a terrifying clarity. They had called me dramatic. They had called me unforgiving. They had called me selfish. They had pushed and pushed and pushed, and I had always backed down, always smoothed things over, always swallowed the injustice for the sake of family. But as I stared at the ruin of the most beautiful thing I had ever owned, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done backing down. This was not the end of the story. This was the beginning of a war. My first call was to my father. I sent him a picture, my hand trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. He called back instantly, his voice tight with a shared heartbroken rage. "I'm coming over," was all he said. While I waited, I called the police to file a report. The officer who arrived was sympathetic but pragmatic. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" he asked, looking at the brutal damage. "Yes," I said, my voice flat. "My cousin?" The officer's expression didn't change. He'd heard it all before. "Did you see her do it? Do you have any proof?" "No," I admitted. "We had an argument. I told her she couldn't borrow the car. She threatened me, said I'd be sorry." He wrote it down, but his tone was clear. A family squabble and a vague threat weren't enough. Without a witness or a confession, it's just your word against hers, he said kindly. I'll file the report, and if you get any more information, you call us. When my dad arrived, he surveyed the damage in silence, his jaw working. He walked a slow circle around the car, his hand hovering over the scratches as if he couldn't bear to touch them. He had poured as much of his own sweat and love into this car as I had. She's gone too far this time, Maya, he said, his voice a low rumble. This isn't just a broken toy. The family confrontation happened that evening. I knew it was pointless, but I had to do it. I had to see her face. I drove my dad's pickup truck to Aunt Carol's house, where the family was gathered for their usual Sunday dinner. I walked in, and the conversation immediately stopped. All eyes were on me. Where's Sasha? I asked, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. Aunt Carol stepped forward, her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. She's in her room. She's very upset by your cruelty to her. What do you want? I want her to come out here and look me in the eye, I said. Sasha emerged from the hallway a moment later. She was wearing pale pink pajamas, and her expression was one of perfect wide-eyed innocence. She looked from me to my father, who stood behind me like a stone sentinel. What is it, Maya? She asked, her voice a soft, wounded whisper. My car was vandalized last night, I said, watching her for any flicker, any tell. There was nothing. She was a master. Someone keyed it badly. They carved a word into the door. Sasha brought her hand to her mouth in a flawless pantomime of horror. Oh my God, she gasped. That's horrible. Who would do something like that? I think you know, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The performance was instantaneous. Tears welled in her eyes. Her lip trembled. Me, she choked out. You think I did that? After everything, just because I was upset. Maya, how could you even think that? I would never. Aunt Carol flew to her side, wrapping a protective arm around her. You see, she shrieked, her voice rising. You see what you're doing? You say no to her. You break her heart about her birthday, and then you have the gall to come into my home and accuse her of being a criminal. You're the cruel one, Maya. You've always been jealous of her, and now you're making up these horrible lies to hurt her. The gaslighting was so intense, so complete, that for a terrifying second, I almost faltered. The entire room was looking at me like I was a monster. My uncles and other cousins shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. They didn't want to believe it. It was easier to believe I was a paranoid, vindictive liar than to believe their sweet, charming Sasha was capable of such ugly vandalism. I'm not lying, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely control. She threatened me, and then my car was destroyed. Proof, Aunt Carol screamed. Do you have any proof? Of course you don't, because it's a fantasy. A vicious story you invented to make yourself the victim. Get out of my house. Get out, and don't you dare bother my daughter again. I looked at Sasha, who was sobbing into her mother's shoulder, her face a perfect mask of tragic innocence. And in that moment, I knew that showing them proof, even if I had it, wouldn't matter. They would explain it away. They would excuse it. They would find a way to make it my fault. The family wouldn't give me justice, so I would have to find it for myself. I turned without another word and walked out, my father following behind me. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new front. The feeling of being gaslit by an entire room of your own relatives is a unique kind of poison. It seeps into your bones, making you question your own sanity. As my dad and I drove away from Aunt Carol's house, the furious, self-righteous expressions on their faces were burned into my mind. Did I sound crazy? Was I so blinded by my anger that I was pinning this on Sasha without any real evidence beyond a gut feeling? Don't you dare doubt yourself, my dad said, as if reading my mind. His voice was firm. You know who she is, Maya. I know who she is. The problem isn't you, it's them. They've been enabling her for 21 years. They don't know how to stop. His words were a lifeline. He was right. My gut wasn't wrong. I just needed to prove it. I needed something they couldn't deny, couldn't spin, couldn't excuse. I needed proof. The next day, I started my investigation. I took the day off from work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely a lie. I went back to the carport, my stomach twisting as I looked at the wounded shell of my car. I wasn't just looking at the damage anymore. I was looking for clues. I walked the perimeter of the apartment complex, my eyes scanning for anything out of place, and then I saw it. On the front of the building, directly across the narrow access road from my carport, there was a small, dark dome mounted above the main entrance, a security camera. It belonged to the condo building managed by a notoriously cranky retiree named Mr. Henderson. But the camera's position, it was perfect. It would have had a clear, direct line of sight to my car. My heart started hammering. This was it. This could be everything. Getting the footage was a delicate operation. I couldn't just march over and demand it. I needed a strategy. That afternoon, I baked a loaf of my mom's famous banana bread, the one secret weapon our family had for smoothing over any situation. Armed with the still warm loaf, I went and knocked on Mr. Henderson's door. He opened it a crack, his face set in its usual suspicious scowl. "What do you want?" he grunted. "Hi, Mr. Henderson," I said, offering him my most charming, non-threatening smile. "My name is Maya. I live across the way. I baked some banana bread and made too much. I was hoping you might like some." He eyed the loaf, then me. His scowl softened a fraction. He was a man who appreciated baked goods. "That's mighty neighborly of you," he said, opening the door wider. I spent the next 20 minutes listening to him complain about the city council, the noisy tenants on the third floor, and the price of everything these days. I nodded and agreed and sympathized. Finally, when he was mid-rant about property taxes, I saw my opening. "Speaking of property," I said, my voice full of practiced dismay, "I had the most awful thing happen last night." Carr was terribly vandalized. His eyes lit up with a new kind of indignant energy. "Vandalism? Hooligans. It's a plague. I know," I said, "and the police weren't much help. They said without evidence, there's not much they can do. I was just telling my dad, my only hope is if someone happened to see something." I paused, then looked toward his front door. "You know, I noticed you have that wonderful security camera. It's so smart to have one these days." He puffed out his chest. "Top-of-the-line system, records in high definition. Cloud backup." This was my chance. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Henderson, I know this is a huge favor to ask, but I think your camera might have been pointed right at my car. Is there any way at all, you could check the footage from the night before last, just to see if it caught anything?" He frowned, the old suspicion returning. "That's private footage. I'm not supposed to just show it to people." I laid it on thick. I told him about the car, how my dad and I had built it. I didn't mention Sasha. I framed it as a random act of violence that had left me feeling unsafe in my own home. His expression softened again. He was a man who understood pride in one's property. "All right," he sighed, after a long, dramatic pause. "Come on in, but just for a minute." He led me to a small office where a desktop computer sat. He logged into his security system, his fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. He brought up the archives, selected the correct date, and a timeline appeared. "What time?" "Did you say sometime after midnight, I think?" I said, my throat dry. He scrolled to 1 a.m. He hit play. The screen showed a grainy night vision view of the carport. There was my Mustang, a pale green ghost under the security light. We watched and fast-forward as the digital clock in the corner. Nothing but the wind rustling the leaves of a nearby tree. My heart sank. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it happened later. And then, at 1:52 a.m., a figure entered the frame. My breath caught in my chest. It was a person in a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up low over their face. They paused, looked around to see if anyone was watching, and then they pulled something from their pocket, a key. Even in the grainy footage, I could see the glint of metal under the light. The figure started at the front of the car, dragging the key along the side with a vicious, deliberate force. They moved down the length of the car, gouging and scratching. They went to the hood, then the other side, where they spent a longer time carving. Selfish. "Well, I'll be," Mr. Henderson breathed beside me. "The nerve of that punk," the figure finished, gave the car one last look, and then turned to run off. As they turned, the hoodie slipped back for just a fraction of a second. It was all I needed. The distinctive profile, the fall of her ponytail, and something on her wrist that caught the lightest silver charm bracelet I had given her for her 16th birthday. It was her. It was Sasha. The proof was undeniable. "Can you zoom in on that?" I asked, my voice a raw whisper. Mr. Henderson clicked and dragged, enlarging the image of her face. It was blurry, but it was unmistakably her. I felt a dizzying wave of vindication and nausea. I wasn't crazy. I was right, Mr. Henderson, I said, turning to him, my eyes pleading. "I need a copy of this video. It's the only thing that will prove who did this." He looked from the screen to my face. He saw the tears welling in my eyes. He nodded slowly. "Every hooligan deserves their day in court," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He clicked a few buttons, and a progress bar appeared on the screen, exporting video file. I had her now, I just had to decide what to do with her. Possessing the video was like holding a live grenade. The file sat on a USB drive in my pocket, a tiny, rectangular vessel of pure destructive power. For 2 days, I did nothing. I just carried it with me, its weight, a constant, heavy reminder. My first instinct was to storm back to my aunt's house too, slap the USB drive down on the dining room table and play the footage on a loop for all of them to see. I imagined their faces, the shock, the sputtering denials turning to ash in their mouths. But then I thought it through. What would happen? Aunt Carol would pivot instantly. She was drunk. She'd cry. She was heartbroken over what you did. She didn't know what she was doing. Sasha would produce a flood of tears, a performance of Oscar-worthy remorse. They would frame her as the victim of her own emotions, a poor girl driven to a moment of madness by my cruelty, and the pressure on me would be immense. Don't ruin her life over one mistake, Maya. Think of her future. Let's just handle this within the family. They would try to buy my silence with a check for the repairs, and I would be cast as the villain if I refused. Showing them the video wouldn't bring justice. It would just start a new round of manipulation. I realized that for this cycle to finally, truly end, the consequences had to come from outside the family. They had to be real official, something that Aunt Carol's tears and Sasha's histrionics couldn't erase. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about drawing a line so deep and so permanent that no one in my family would ever dare to cross it again. It was about protecting the next thing I built for myself and the thing after that. It was about my future peace. With a heart that felt both heavy as lead and light as a feather, I made the call. I went down to the police station. I met with a detective, a calm, professional woman who listened to my story without interruption. I told her about the argument, the threats, the family's denial, and then I slid the USB drive across her desk. And now I have proof, I said. She took the drive and plugged it into her computer. I watched her face as she viewed the footage. Her professional calm didn't waver, but I saw her jaw tighten. She played it twice. That's her, she asked, pointing to the grainy image of Sasha's face. That's her, I confirmed. Vandalism over $5,000 in damages is a felony in this state, the detective said, her voice matter of fact. She took out a fresh set of forms. We'll get a formal estimate for the damages, but based on the make and model of the car and the extent of the damage you've described, I'm confident it will exceed that threshold. We have more than enough to issue a warrant for her arrest. A warrant for her arrest. The words hung in the air, heavy and real. This was it. The point of no return. I took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. As I was leaving, the detective paused. The warrant will likely be processed and served in the next day or two. We'll need an address. I gave her Aunt Carol's address. And then I told her one more thing. Her 20th birthday is this Saturday, I said quietly. She's having a big party at her house that night. The detective looked at me, a flicker of something understanding, perhaps in her eyes. Police work is often unpredictable, she said, her expression unreadable. We can't control the timing of these things. We serve warrants as soon as they're in our hands. I knew what she was saying. She wasn't making me any promises, but she was acknowledging the cosmic, terrible poetry of the situation. I hadn't requested it. I hadn't demanded it. I had simply given them a piece of information. What they did with it was up to them. But as I walked out of the police station and into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of grim, terrible, and absolute certainty. Sasha was going to get a birthday present she would never forget. The night of Sasha's 21st birthday party was unnaturally warm for October. I sat on my small balcony, listening to the distant sounds of the city, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside me. I hadn't been invited, of course. I was officially excommunicated. But I could picture the scene at Aunt Carol's house perfectly. The backyard would be strewn with fairy lights. A rented bar would be set up on the patio. A DJ would be playing music just a little too loud. Sasha would be at the center of it all, radiant in her new dress, holding court, accepting gifts and compliments, the benevolent queen of the evening. The drama with my car would be a forgotten footnote, or worse, a story twisted to make her look like a tragic victim. The thought made my stomach churn. Around 9:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of my cousins, Mark, one of the few who had called to check on me after the big blow-up, his voice full of quiet sympathy. The text was simple. They're here. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat. In my chest, I hadn't been sure it would actually happen, but it was. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. My phone buzzed again a few minutes later. This time it was a call from Mark. I answered, my hand shaking slightly. Maya, he whispered, his voice frantic. In the background, I could hear shouting, confused voices, and the distinct, sharp edge of a woman's scream. It sounded like Aunt Carol. What's happening? I asked, my own voice a whisper. 2 police cars just pulled up, he said, the words tumbling out. They walked right into the backyard. The music stopped. They asked for Sasha, in front of everyone, Maya, everyone, her friends from college, all the family. He broke off, and I heard another shriek, this one higher pitched. Sasha. They're arresting her. Mark breathed into the phone. They're reading her rights. Aunt Carol is losing her mind. She's screaming at them. Sasha is sobbing, saying it's a mistake. Oh my God. Maya. They just put her in handcuffs. I closed my eyes, picturing it. The flashing blue and red lights painting the panicked faces of the party guests in demonic strokes. Sasha, the birthday queen, being led away in disgrace, her hands cuffed behind her back. The public. Undeniable and absolute humiliation. It was more terrible and more complete than anything I could have imagined. And then, the hurricane turned toward me. Your phone's about to blow up, Mark warned. Aunt Carol just saw me on the phone and started screaming your name. She's telling everyone you did this. Gotta go. He hung up. He was right. A second later, a call came through from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. It was Aunt Carol. She shrieked, her voice distorted by fury. You did this, you monster. How could you do this to your own blood? You ruined her. You ruined her life. Over a stupid, rusty old car. I hope you're happy. I hope you rot in hell. I didn't say a word. I listened to her scream until her voice was hoarse, until her rage devolved into choked, gasping sobs. I listened to the poison she had been storing up for a lifetime pour through the phone, and when she was finally done, when there was nothing but her ragged breathing on the other end of the line, I said one thing. Actions have consequences, Carol, I said, my voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake, and then I hung up. I sat there in the dark, my phone now buzzing incessantly with texts and calls from angry, shocked family members. I ignored them all. The storm was raging, but it felt distant, like watching a hurricane on the news. Inside my apartment, it was quiet. I looked at my untouched glass of wine, then pushed it away. I didn't feel like celebrating. I didn't feel joy or triumph. I felt a vast, hollow, and profound sense of relief. The cycle was broken. I was free. The cost of that freedom was a family I wasn't sure I had ever really had in the first place. In the weeks that followed, my family fractured along predictable lines. Aunt Carol, Uncle Rob, and their branch of the family treated me as if I were a murderer. I was erased from their lives so completely it was as if I had never existed. Any relatives who sided with them followed suit. I received a handful of venomous text messages which I read, deleted, and blocked. The silence they left behind was a relief. My parents and my dad's side of the family, however, rallied around me. My father especially was my rock. You did the hardest thing, Maya, he told me, his eyes full of a pride that warmed me to my core. You chose to respect yourself when no one else would. That takes a kind of courage most people don't have. My cousin Mark became a surprising ally, acting as a source of information from the other side. He told me about the fallout. Sasha had spent her 21st birthday in a holding cell before her parents could post bail. Many of her friends had scattered after the public humiliation of her arrest, distancing themselves from the drama. The legal process was slow and grueling. Sasha was charged with felony vandalism. Faced with the undeniable video evidence, her only option was to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, a misdemeanor. The judge was not amused by her story of a family squabble. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and, most importantly, full financial restitution for the damages to my car. The first check arrived in the mail 3 months after her arrest. It was a cashier's check from my aunt and uncle. For the full estimated amount of the repairs, $12,450. There was no note, no apology, just the money. It felt like blood money. A final, resentful admission of defeat. The day I took my Mustang back to the auto body shop was bittersweet. The owner, a man named Sal who had sold my dad half the parts for the restoration, whistled when he saw the damage. Someone really had it out for you, kid, he said, shaking his head. You have no idea, I replied. We can fix her, he assured me. We'll have to take these panels down to bare metal. Smooth everything out, match. That green, she looked good as new. No one will ever know, but I would know. For the next 6 weeks, my car was gone. I drove my dad's old truck, feeling like a part of me was missing. I focused on work, on my friendships, on the quiet, drama-free life I was building for myself. I learned to appreciate the silence, the absence of manipulation, of passive aggression, of the constant low-level anxiety that had been the background noise of my life for so long, was a gift. When Sal called to tell me the car was ready, my heart pounded with a nervous excitement. I walked into the shop and there she was, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The paint was flawless, a perfect deep sea of Highland green. The panels were smooth. The word selfish was gone. She was perfect again, as perfect as she had been the day we first finished her. I thanked Sal, paid the bill with Sasha's money, and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of leather and gasoline filled my lungs. I turned the key and the engine roared to life with its deep, throaty rumble. It was the sound of my own heartbeat, strong and steady. As I pulled out of the shop and onto the open road, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The surface was healed. The scars I knew were still there, hidden deep beneath the layers of primer and paint. But they were a part of her history now, a part of mine. A reminder that some things, when they are broken, can be made whole again, stronger in the places where the damage was deepest. A year after the arrest, the quiet in my life had become a comfortable, welcome friend. The family rift was permanent. Holiday gatherings were smaller, divided affairs. I spent Thanksgiving with my parents and my dad's side of the family, and it was the most peaceful holiday I could remember. There was no walking on eggshells, no placating a volatile aunt, no watching my cousin manipulate the room. There was just laughter, good food, and the easy comfort of people who genuinely loved each other. I heard through the grapevine that Sasha had completed her community service, working in a soup kitchen. She was still in therapy. No one knew if it was making a difference or if she was just playing another role. I found that I didn't care. Her story was no longer my story. I had put a period at the end of our shared sentence, and I had walked away to start a new paragraph of my own. My Mustang became my partner in this new life. We took long drives up the coast, the wind whipping through my hair, the engine a steady, powerful companion. The car was no longer just a symbol of my hard work. It was a symbol of my freedom. It was the boundary I had finally enforced, the line I had dared to draw. Every time I turned the key, I felt a quiet surge of pride, not just in the machine itself, but in the woman who had fought to protect it, and in doing so had fought to protect herself. One Saturday afternoon, I was at a classic car show, leaning against the fender of my Mustang, watching people admire the flawless paint. A man, older than me, with kind eyes and grease under his fingernails, stopped and walked a slow circle around her. "A '68 Highland Green," he said, his voice full of reverence. "You don't see many this clean. Looks like she just rolled off the factory floor. Bet she doesn't have a single scar on her." I smiled. A real, genuine smile. I thought of the deep gouges that were now invisible, the angry word carved into the door, the layers of new paint that covered the wounds. "Oh," I said, patting the warm hood of the car like it was an old, trusted friend. "She's got her scars. You just can't see them anymore." He gave me a puzzled look, but I just continued to smile, because I knew the truth. The scars were the best part of her story. They were proof of what she had survived, and so was I. The 2 years that followed were like a long, slow, cleansing breath. The quiet that had initially felt like a void soon became a comfortable, cherished space. My life, once defined by the gravitational pull of family drama, was now defined by my own choices. I got a promotion at work. I started taking pottery classes on Tuesday nights, and I fell in love with a man named Ben, a kind-eyed architect who loved the story of my Mustang's scars, both visible and hidden. He understood that the car was more than metal and paint. It was a part of my history, a testament to my resilience. Our life together was simple and profound. We took the Mustang for drives on sunny weekends. We hosted small dinner parties for our friends. We built a world for ourselves that was peaceful and authentic. The fractured state of my family became a settled fact, like a mountain range on a map that you learn to navigate around. I was happy, genuinely, deeply, and uncomplicatedly happy. The past was a story I could tell, not a wound that still ached. And then, the phone rang on a rainy Tuesday in March. It was my mother, her voice thick with tears. "It's Grandma Jean," she said, and my own heart seized with a familial dread. Grandma Jean was my father and Aunt Carol's mother, the matriarch of our family, the sun around which all of our disparate planets had once orbited. She was 92 years old, sharp as a tack, and the one person who had always managed, through sheer force of will, to keep the peace. "She had a fall, sweetie," my mom explained. "She's at St. Mary's, the doctors say. They say it's a matter of time now. Hospice care." My mother broke down into a SOB and Maya. "She's asking for everyone. She wants to see the whole family together. All of us." I closed my eyes, the comfortable piece of my world shattering into a million pieces. I knew what this meant. It wasn't just a request from a dying woman. It was a summons, and it was a weapon that, in Aunt Carol's hands, would be aimed directly at me. Grandma Jean's dying wish was about to become the battleground for a war I thought I had already won. The pressure began less than an hour after my mother's call. It didn't come from my parents. They knew better. They were grieving, caught in the impossible space between their mother's dying wish and my hard-won peace. No. The pressure came, as always, from the source of the original poison. It came from Aunt Carol. She didn't call me. She knew I wouldn't. answer. Instead, she began a campaign of emotional warfare, using other family members as her soldiers. Calls and texts started trickling in from my uncles, my more distant cousins, people who had remained neutral in the Great Car War. "Carol says your grandmother is heartbroken," one text read. "She just wants to see you and Sasha. Make up before she goes. Maya, your aunt is worried the stress of this feud is making your grandmother worse." An uncle told my father, who relayed it to me with a heavy sigh. "She thinks your stubbornness is going to put her mother in an early grave." The manipulation was so blatant, so grotesquely self-serving, that it was almost impressive. She was using her own mother's mortality as a tool to rewrite history, to paint me as the cruel, unforgiving villain who would deny a dying woman her final wish. Ben watched me as I paced the living room, my phone buzzing with each new incoming salvo. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," he said, his voice a calm anchor in my storm. "Your peace is not a bargaining chip." "But it's my grandmother," I whispered, the conflict tearing me apart. "I love her. How can I ignore her when she asks for this? But how can I stand in that room next to Sasha and pretend that everything is okay? How can I let them win? Because that's what this is about for Carol. It's about winning. It's about forcing me to bend, to break the boundary I almost killed myself to build." The old feelings were churning inside me, the guilt, the anger, the suffocating sense of familial obligation. It felt like the ghost of the woman I used to be was clawing its way out, the woman who always gave in, who always smoothed things over, who always sacrificed her own feelings for the sake of a fragile, artificial peace. "Going to see your grandmother is one thing," Ben said, walking over and taking my hands. "Performing a fake reconciliation for an audience is another. You get to decide what you're willing to do." No one else. He was right. I had to go. I had to see my grandmother to say my goodbyes, but I would do it on my terms. I would walk into that hospital room not as a pawn in Carol's game, but as myself. A woman who loved her grandmother, but who also loved and respected herself enough to refuse to light herself on fire to keep others warm. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and prepared to walk back into the heart of the storm. The hospice wing of St. Mary's smelled of antiseptic and fading lilies. It was a place of hushed voices and profound waiting silence. My parents were already there, their faces etched with grief. We hugged a tight, desperate embrace. They told me that Carol and Sasha were in the room with Grandma Jean right now. "Carol is being difficult," my dad warned me, his voice low. "She's positioning herself as the gatekeeper. Just be prepared." I nodded, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. I waited in the small family lounge, leafing through a 2-year-old magazine without seeing the pages. After 20 minutes, the door to my grandmother's room opened, and Aunt Carol emerged. She saw me, and her expression was a complex mixture of triumph and sorrow. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with a false, pious gravity. "I'm so glad you came. Your grandmother has been asking for you. She is very weak. It's important that we don't upset her, that we only bring love and unity into that room, do you understand?" It was a threat disguised as a request. "Play my game or you will be accused of harming a dying woman." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I'm here to see my grandmother," I said, my voice even. Sasha slipped out from behind her, a shadow of her former self. She looked pale and tired, her eyes red. She wouldn't meet my gaze. I walked past them and into the room. Grandma Jean was startlingly small in the large hospital bed, a fragile bird wrapped in white sheets. Her eyes, though clouded with age and medication, lit up when she saw me. "Maya Bean," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. It was her childhood nickname for me. Tears immediately sprang to my eyes. I rushed to her side, taking her frail, papery hand in mine. "Hi, Grandma." I choked out. "You came," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "My beautiful girl, and Sashi is here too." She turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Sasha, who had crept into the room and was hovering near the door. "Both my girls here together. That's all I wanted." Aunt Carol moved to the other side of the bed, a director positioning her actors. "We're all here, Mom," she said loudly. "The whole family. Together again. Just like you wanted. Maya and Sasha have put all that silly business behind them, haven't you, girls?" She looked from me to Sasha, her eyes demanding our compliance. It was happening, the forced performance. My heart hammered against my ribs. My grandmother was looking at me, her eyes full of hope, her hand squeezing mine weakly. This was the moment. I could nod, I could murmur a meaningless platitude, and give this dying woman a moment of manufactured peace. It would be so easy. It would be the kind thing to do. But it would be a lie. A lie told on the edge of a grave. And in that moment, I knew with a searing clarity that my truth, the real, hard-won peace I had built, was more valuable than the fake, fleeting peace they were demanding I perform. I squeezed my grandmother's hand back. "I'm so happy to be here with you, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with emotion but clear and steady. "I love you so much." I did not look at Sasha. I did not acknowledge Carol's statement. I gave my grandmother my love, pure and simple. I refused to give her the lie. From the other side of the bed, I felt the heat of Aunt Carol's furious glare. The battle had been joined. For the next 2 days, the hospice room became a silent battleground. Aunt Carol was relentless. She would talk constantly about the power of forgiveness, about how family is all that matters in the end. Every sentence was a carefully aimed arrow meant to shame me into submission. I ignored her, focusing all my energy and attention on my grandmother. I read to her from her favorite books of poetry. I dabbed her forehead with a cool cloth. I told her stories about my life, about Ben, about my work. I gave her the real me, the happy, peaceful woman I had become. I wanted her last memories of me to be of strength and love, not of a forced, brittle truce. Sasha was a ghost. In the room, she sat in a corner, quiet and watchful. The old fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, hollow weariness. Once, when we were alone in the hallway for a moment, she spoke to me, her voice barely a whisper. "I really am sorry, she said, looking at the floor. "For everything." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I didn't see the spoiled brat who had keyed my car. I saw a young woman who was exhausted, beaten down by the weight of her own actions and, perhaps, by the suffocating force of her mother's will. "I know, Sasha," I said, and for the first time, I think I actually believed it. But it didn't change anything. An apology couldn't rebuild the trust that had been burned to the ground. The most difficult conversation was with my father. We sat in the bleak hospital cafeteria, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. "Your aunt is making things very difficult," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "She's telling people that your refusal to forgive Sasha is causing your grandmother pain. Do you believe that?" I asked, my heart aching. He sighed, a long, ragged sound. "I believe my mother is sad that her family is broken. I hate that she has to feel that sadness in her final days. But, Maya," he reached across the table and took my hand, "I also know that the peace you have now is real, and the peace Carol is demanding is a fantasy. Don't you dare sacrifice something real for something fake. Not even for my mom. She wouldn't want you to do that." His words were a gift, the final piece of armor I needed. He was giving me permission to choose myself, even in the face of death and familial duty. He was telling me that my truth was worth protecting no matter the cost. That evening, I knew what I had to do. I waited until Aunt Carol and Sasha had gone home for a few hours and my parents were taking a walk in the hospital garden. It was just me and Grandma Jean, the room filled with the soft, rhythmic puffing of the oxygen machine. "Grandma," I whispered, leaning close. Her eyes fluttered open. "Maya Bean," she breathed. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice soft. "I know you want all of us to be happy and to love each other, and I want you to know that I am. I am so happy now, and I love this family. The parts of it that are real and true with my whole heart." I took a breath. The way our family looks now, it's different, but it's honest. And I have to live in the honest world, not the one we all used to pretend to live in. Please don't be sad for me. I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm at peace." She looked at me, her gaze surprisingly lucid. She couldn't speak much, but she squeezed my hand, a faint but definite pressure. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. I didn't know if it was a tear of sadness for what was broken or a tear of understanding for what I had found. But in that moment, I felt a sense of closure. I had given her the most important thing I had to offer, the truth. Grandma Jean passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 days later. The funeral was a study in controlled tension. Our family sat in 2 distinct camps on opposite sides of the church aisle, a stark, physical representation of the chasm between us. Aunt Carol, dressed in dramatic black, played the role of the grieving noble daughter to perfection. She delivered a eulogy that was less about her mother and more about her mother's supposed favorite topic, the sacred, unbreakable bond of family. It was a final public rebuke aimed directly at me. I stared straight ahead, unmoved. The reception afterward, held at my late grandmother's house, was even worse. The air was thick with whispered conversations and sympathetic glances thrown in Carol's direction. She had successfully painted me as the cold-hearted granddaughter who had embittered her grandmother's final days. Her final gambit came near the end of the reception. She stood up, clinking a glass for attention. "I just want to thank everyone for coming to honor my beautiful mother," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Her greatest wish was to see her family united in love, and I know she is smiling down from heaven to see us all here together." She then looked directly at me, her eyes shining with unshaded tears. "Maya, dear, come here. Let's have a hug. For Grandma." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. It was a public challenge, a perfectly staged piece of emotional blackmail. To refuse would make me look like a monster in front of everyone. To accept would be to surrender, to validate her entire narrative. The old me would have folded. The old me would have walked across the room and performed the hug for the sake of appearances. But I was not the old me. I stood my ground, my teacup steady in my hand. I met her gaze, and for the first time I didn't feel anger or fear. I felt a profound cleansing pity for her. For this woman whose need for control was so absolute that she would use her own mother's funeral as a stage. I gave her a small, sad smile. "I think we've all had a very long day. Carol," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent room, "I'm going to head home now." And I turned, placed my cup on a nearby table, and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, alone in the spotlight she had created for herself. It was not a dramatic exit. It was the simple, quiet act of a woman who was finally, completely, and irrevocably free. As Ben and I drove home, the weight of the last week, the last few years, began to lift. I had faced the ultimate test, and I had not broken my boundary had held, not because it was made of anger, but because it was made of self-respect. Months later, the reading of Grandma Jean's will caused one final predictable stir. She had left the bulk of her estate to be divided equally among her children, but she had also left a few personal items to her grandchildren. To Sasha, she left a collection of antique porcelain dolls. To me, she left her car, a well-loved, slightly dented 20-year-old Buick. And in a sealed letter addressed to me, she had written just one sentence: "For my Maya Bean, who always knows how to find her own road." Aunt Carol was furious, claiming the car was a slight against Sasha. I just smiled. It wasn't the car that was the gift. It was the words. It was the validation. My grandmother had seen me. She had understood. I sold the Buick and donated the money to a women's shelter. I already had the only car I would ever need. The next weekend, Ben and I took the Mustang out for a long drive, the engine rumbling, a steady, powerful heartbeat. We drove towards the coast, towards the setting sun. I realized the car was no longer a symbol of a battle I had won. It was just a car again. A beautiful, wonderful car that was taking me forward into a life that I had built myself, on a road that was all my own, and the journey was just beginning.